Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight or this afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Mimi Boblick. I'm just going to give it 1 minute so that people can join. I see that there's participants logging in right now, so we'll just give it a few seconds. Thank you. All right. Well, I can see some people are still getting on, but I'll start with introductions and so we can get going. We have a lot to cover tonight. First, I want to just welcome you. We're really glad that you're here tonight. I hope you find this conversation helpful. We're joined by an incredible professional who has a lot of experience in this area, as well as has been a great partner of ours. Again, my name is Mimi Boblick. I am a founding partner of Parents Against Vaping. I joined this organization in 2018 when they were founding because one of my three kids, then 17, was vaping. So nobody knew what it was back then. Now I think everybody knows. But it really took me by surprise. And this is a family who never would have smoked, although our previous generations did smoke quite a bit. So we were all surprised. I wanted to understand this more and see how I could be helpful. So got involved mostly on the educational programming side. And so what we're doing tonight is really some of that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But that is me. I want to thank, other than my incredible panelists tonight, I want to thank some of the people who are here tonight with me as part of Parents Against Vaping. One of them is Austin Spence, who is, I call him the Wizard of Oz. He's done all the tech work behind here, all the behind the scenes work, and he's actually going to be fielding the Q&A tonight. So he'll be checking in on the questions, and I'll show you how to do that. Some people may want to ask questions live, and he'll try to get to as many of those as he can throughout the evening, and some of them I hope to be able to answer live as well. So thanks to Austin. And our executive director, Caroline Joyce, is also here tonight with us. So thanks to Caroline for joining us. I wanted to just share this QR code. We want to hear from you. If you are interested and willing to share your story, we want to connect with you. We want to understand what you're going through. So if you want to share your story with us, scan this QR code. You can also go on our website and reach out to us directly. But here's a way to share your story, to connect with us. And if you want to get help and or get involved, we want to hear from you. So I just wanted to share that. It's also going to be in the chat. Austin's going to put that in the chat for you as well. So you don't have to scan it right now. Just a very quick background about who we are. Parents Against Vaping, again, founded in 2018. We are really the national parent voice in this conversation. We started, I won't share our backstory. It's a crazy story, but we don't have to go into it. But basically, Juul, which is the original e-cigarette of choice for our kids in 2018, was targeting our youth very directly. And so we got involved and basically do several things. One is that we advocate for changes in the laws on the federal, state, and local level. These laws, we hope, put in place to protect our youth. And so that is something we fight every day for. And then we do what we're doing tonight, which is educating. We educate parents and public health professionals and pretty much anyone who wants our resources, we are willing to share. And so that is a really important part of our programming, is just to make people aware of what the situation is and trying to support our parents as much as we can, and people who are struggling, parents and families who are struggling. So we support our families through a number of ways, reaching out directly to us and connecting with us that way. Through our website, we have a lot of great resources on our website. We have a a parent support group on Facebook, and we have hundreds of people on that. And that's just a great way to share, have conversations with other parents going through similar struggles. So without any more hesitation, I'd like to introduce our phenomenal panelist tonight, Jonathan Avery. So, just by way of background, we're parents, but we are parents who source our medical and scientific information from world-renowned professionals so that we can share the most up-to-date resources with parents and public health professionals. And Dr. Avery has just been an incredible resource for us, really, since we founded. And he has a long list of credentials, which you can see, including vice chair for addiction psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. We've just been really grateful that he's willing and able to share his wisdom with us throughout all these years and with you all tonight. So, welcome, Dr. Avery.
Amy, thank you for having me. It's always great to be here. I'm so grateful for all that PAVE has done, and it's been such a wonderful partnership over the years. So happy to tackle this together.
Thank you. And I hope you all agree. I'm sure you will. I just find his wisdom and his insight and advice very measured. I think as parents, we tend to get a little panicky. I certainly did when I was going through this. And so it's really nice to hear sort of a voice of reason, and it kind of calms me down. And I will say, just as a plug, that he has started a fantastic podcast called Thriving with Addiction that he hosts, and he has terrific panelists on there. And so if you're interested and able, I would definitely subscribe and check it out because there's some really good content on there.
Thank you. No, we had a great episode on parenting just 2 weeks ago, parenting substance use and the power of connection, which I think we'll talk some of today, but definitely a lot of overlap between the advice we're giving there and everything you guys are doing.
Definitely worth checking that out. And just a little housekeeping. So, as I mentioned, we will be answering questions that many of you have written in your registration. So, we'll be trying to get to some of those, especially sort of sourcing the most frequent ones that were asked. So, we're going to go through those tonight, and hopefully, we'll have a couple of extra minutes to answer some other questions live. And in the meantime, you can ask your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window, usually. It might be at the top, but it's usually at the bottom. And put those in the Q&A. These are private, so Austin will see those. We'll try to get to as many as possible tonight. So let's just get right into it. One big question that came up always, lately, while e-cigarettes, vaping, has been very, very popular among our youth and young adults, nicotine pouches have become extremely popular in the last couple of years. And I feel like you think it's a free pass since they're not, perhaps these are people who aren't yet vaping, or maybe they are, but pouches, I think they think they're less dangerous. They have, chemicals, but they're not breathing them into their lungs. So the question is, how do we explain to our kids that these products are still harmful to them?
Yeah, I mean, how do we explain anything to them? I mean, I'd like to first just thank the parents for coming. I'm a parent of three myself. Every time I take my 12-year-old anywhere, she just says, "Remember, you're not funny. Don't say anything." So I know this challenge. It's real and ongoing, and it's really hard to talk with them about substances, sex, mental health, all this stuff that we really care about, they especially clamp down on. And so it's good we're here thinking about this together so that we can all tackle this together. So yeah, the pouches, Zyn, it went cigarettes, in the 1950s, 60s, then to the vape devices, and now to these pouches. And they follow a similar pattern. Like in the 1950s and 60s, if you were smoking, it just meant you were alive. The perceived harm was low, the availability was there, it was popular, and so everyone smoked. And then slowly we learned about the harms that come with cigarettes. The perceived harm went up, and then slowly use went down over time. And then these vapes, Juul special, and then the disposables and everything since, they came around in 2018 when PAVE was formed, and the perceived harm then was very low. The availability was increasing, and so our adolescents started using them up to, around 1 in 5 high schoolers in those pandemic era. But then we started to learn about the harms, all the contaminants that the vapes had, the consequences of high dose nicotine, which we'll talk about. And so the use has slowly gone down on those. And now we've got these pouches. There's always going to be something. And these pouches have now this perceived safety, just like everything starts with this perceived safety. And so kids are using it, popular celebrities are using it, politicians are using it, notably. And so there's a sense that, hey, nothing can go wrong with this. And so what we have to explore for our teens with this or anything they're doing is what purpose it's serving to them, what do they know about it, and then hopefully fill in some of this knowledge gap that while it seems safe, there's some local harm that can happen to the mouth. We don't know the long-term consequences of these things. And also concerning for these vapes and for these pouches is they deliver high dose nicotine, which especially in the teen brain impacts attention and mood and cognitive development and can be a risk factor for using other substances. I think we have a few slides on these pouches though, right, Mimi?
Yeah, we do just to, first talk about how, again, as you mentioned, while vaping was going down, the use of these pouches has just skyrocketed. So unfortunately, more and more youth are using them, some who never vaped. And what I suspect is that then once they're addicted, no matter how they got addicted, they're going to start using other nicotine substances like, or, delivery devices like vaping. But I know that early on, youth were using these to kind of get through their addiction through the day if they couldn't vape. So if they were at school or in a place where they could not vape or did not want to get caught vaping, they would use the nicotine pouch to kind of deliver a steady nicotine, hit so that they could get through their day because many are addicted and really need that hit.
Exactly. It's become the new stealth way to use nicotine and almost like popular games. I mean, that's how, I mean, we remember in 2018, 2019, 20, it was like sort of cool to figure out how to vape at school in the bathrooms, sneaking into your devices. Now they just have these pouches they place that are, absorbed in the oral mucosa and the teachers really aren't aware. And the risk in some ways we with cigarettes, you really couldn't smoke at school back in the day. And so you couldn't get the high dose tolerance you can get with the nicotine that these kids can get. And so they can be getting really high dose nicotine, well beyond what you would expect with a cigarette
Mm.
all around the clock. And then when you have high dose nicotine, the dopamine surges in your brain, you're more likely to get stuck on it, to have withdrawal states. Um, and before you know it, you're really stuck. And they
And
look cool to these. I mean, they look like the thing to do. I mean, I carry some products in my office to show parents when they come in, and it's very tempting for me not to use them because they look like they have great flavors, they're appealing, they're attractive. I mean, you can't blame the kids for getting stuck on them.
Yeah, and I think that again, social media has really pushed this. I think that they call them Zinfluencers. The influencers for Zin and other products have made it again look really cool, just like they did in 2018 and onward with the vapes, right? And I think that there have been more and more influencers and others willing to come forward on social media when they've had lung issues, if they're in the hospital with, some kind of vape related lung injury or other, issues that they've had physically, that they're willing to share those stories. But so far, I have not seen any negative stories about pouches on social media. So right now, I think to your point, it's perceived, like a free pass, and they are
Exactly.
handy.
There's been some pushback, like especially maybe not on the team influencers, but like Huberman and his podcast. He's a lot of these sort of like older broy influencers are starting to push back
Mm.
on it a bit. But the kids, I don't think it's quite infiltrated their social media feeds quite yet.
Well, and for parents, it's really important to know these are super accessible. So, they're next to the candy in the bodegas and the delis and convenience stores and so forth. So these are really easy to get. So just to be aware, looking in the backpacks and checking their rooms and so forth, and just looking out for the behaviors, which maybe we can share at some point about the kind of what to look out for in terms of behaviors of vaping. Because as a parent, I missed them early days, and now I understand them now. And looking back, I missed quite a few of them, including the coughing and just the behavior, the panicking and the high heart rate, the panic attacks, and so forth. I missed a lot of that. So I think it's really important, and these are on our website as well, just to know what the signs of nicotine addiction might be so that you can, help support your youth.
And just practically on these, you have to park them. So you can't chew them like gum. So there is sort of like subtle, if they're like parking something and they look like they have like a cotton ball in their mouth, that's sort of they get used to talking with them, but you can sort of detect it with time. I can always tell when someone is trying to talk and they're trying to hide the Zin because and so it's not gum. And I think that's an important thing to note
But we do know it's bad for your oral biome, right?
for sure.
Yeah. So if nothing else, dentists can often detect when kids have been vaping because you can see it in the in the gums. Um, so the next question, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of marijuana versus nicotine. And I know a lot of parents have been asking about marijuana, cannabis, weed, whatever, there's several names for it that are used. But for now, we'll stick to the nicotine, but we are going to get to cannabis later on here. But if you can talk a little bit about how vaping nicotine affects the body and the brain and how that's different than cigarettes and or marijuana, if you have a chance to talk about both.
Right. Well, the reason I got connected with PAVE was that our surgeons here at the hospital for adolescent medicine or adolescent orthopedic surgeons, they're super obsessed with their surgical outcomes. And so they've always tested their kids for nicotine. And, cigarettes were going down, so they weren't picking up nicotine with kids. And then when Juul and the vaped devices, which are also called nicotine sticks to one of the questions, when they started taking off, they were starting to detect all this nicotine in their kids coming for voluntary surgeries. And they were worried to impact their numbers because vaping seems benign sometimes when you look at the what people are saying about it, but it has so many effects on the body, including the cardiovascular system, constricting blood vessels, prevents healing. Here we go. I was going to save the brain to last, but certainly the contaminants in the vapes and some of the other stuff that comes with the delivery systems can impact the lungs. It impacts the heart. It's a stimulant. Weakens the immune system, as that says. But the main thing we worry about, especially for the adolescent, is the developing brain. Nicotine may be more of a gateway drug than any other substance by some impacts. It does hijack the reward pathway. It impacts the acetylcysteine receptor, and then dopamine gets released. And very quickly, your brain says, that's good. I mean, nicotine in of itself, it does both stimulate you and relax you in a way that we can't quite do that combo in our brain ourselves. And so some adolescents, especially those with mental health issues around anxiety or attention, they get it and it's like, ooh, I'm not sure what it's doing. It doesn't feel like alcohol, it doesn't feel like weed, but it's answering something for me. And then the reward system gets activated. And before you know it, you're using it all the time, and your brain's giving you all these signals to use it. And then that increases your odds of wanting to use marijuana, to get in trouble with opiates if you're prescribed them, to binge drink on alcohol. And then once you start taking it every day and you try to remove it, say you become concerned about it, you have that health class talk, parents are trying to clamp down, you try to stop it and it comes with a wicked withdrawal state. I think any former smoker can tell you, it's one of the most unpleasant things you can experience. And again, this is sort of like smoking cessation withdrawal on drugs because they've been getting high dose nicotine from these pouches and these vapes. And so the withdrawal is brutal. You're anxious, you can't sleep, you're feeling upset in your stomach, you can't eat. It's pretty miserable. And you're trying to deal with all these other pressures that the kids have these days, right? You're trying the school pressure and friends, and you've got these other addictive devices that I think are in the mix that it's hard to say, I'm really going to just focus on managing this withdrawal state. The brain seeks easier outcomes, and so sometimes it feels the easier thing is to keep using. And then if you're using vaping daily, it doubles, triples your odds of developing a mood disorder, anxiety disorder, worsens those conditions if they exist before, impacts impulsivity and ADHD symptoms. And so it really can cause more harm than I think sometimes people realize.
Yeah, I mean, again, for my own experience with my own child, I missed some of the signs, and the lungs certainly with the coughing. There was a dry cough that I just sort of felt was allergies. I'm sure that was irritation caused by the vaping. The heart, she would say, "My heart is racing. I don't really know what's going on," and I'm like, well, are you vaping? And that, because that's definitely an obvious causal effect there, cause and effect on the brain. I think it's important for us as parents to acknowledge to our kids, look, it might make you feel better in the short term. It might, it probably does. And so we could see the appeal to that, but just know that over time, it's going to make it actually worse for you. It's going to make it harder to concentrate, harder to do your schoolwork, and harder to do all these things because you're trying to just figure out where you're going to get your next hit. And, we've heard of kids sleeping with vapes under their pillows because they really need to know that they can take a hit at any time, day or night. So it is real, it's really intense, and it's very hard to quit once you start.
Yeah, falling asleep with the vapes, and then people fall asleep with the Zyn or the pouches in their mouth these days. That's just to get that hit overnight so it doesn't wake them up. And yeah, you get really stuck. And I will say, it's very hard to tell kids these negative consequences. And when you have that delicate balance of sort of validating that they're sort of stuck and in a really tough spot and they're in all these stresses and giving that information without pushing them more to the secret. So it is tough because we hear this and I feel the panic rising in my own chest for my adolescence and it's you have to very carefully give this information and maybe make your way there after understanding all the other things that are stressing them out. And the other thing I'll say for the addicted person who's really stuck on it, there's a part of their brain that really wants it, and there's a part of their brain that doesn't and wants to change.
Mm.
And so there, as much as it can feel like a tug of war between you and them, it's also a tug of war and mainly a tug of war between them and them as well.
Yeah, interesting. And we'll get to that quitting uh, issue in a bit because I'm really interested in that. Um, so this gets to something we were just talking about, which is that, I have seen on social media, and I thought I saw it even on one of the podcasts you're talking about with all these wellness experts. They talk about perhaps many of the wellness experts, and in their podcasts, social media, talk about using nicotine to sharpen their senses, makes them more productive. So I think that really influences youth's perspective on nicotine. Well, it must be fine for you if these incredible, wellness gurus are using it. But I'm wondering how we can talk to our kids about the effect that nicotine has on an adult brain versus on a youth brain, because I think that's pretty crucial based on what you're also describing.
Right. And so some of the things that I've heard, I mean, Huberman, he's that famous Stanford professor that has the famous podcast. He talks about using nicotine like every couple weeks when he has a task he really wants to accomplish. He sort of seeks out the nicotine helps his concentration and also relaxes him in the moment. And then there's other influencers that use it more frequently. There's been some pushback on them because the reality is, just to step back even more, substances help. That's why we do them. Nicotine does help for concentration at first. Alcohol helps for anxiety, social function. Opiates help for pain at first. Weed helps for anxiety and sleep at first. They all help at first. That's why we opt for them because we often need that relief. Um, and if you were able to moderate these substances, as most people are, and to use them once a week or occasionally, you would probably be okay and not develop dependence, especially if you didn't have risk factors like mental health and addiction. The problem is that once you see these things help and they help the way nothing else does, it's a lot to ask, especially the adolescent brain, not to keep using them. Because the adolescent brain is still developing until 25. It doesn't have this frontal cortex, which puts the brakes on the behavior fully developed yet. And so it can't regulate and moderate the way the adult brain can. And so it becomes very hard, especially with all these pressures at school and all these pressures in life, and to not just say, all right, this worked once, I'm going to use it again, and then I'm going to use it again, and more frequently until you're really stuck on it. And so, adolescence is just this highly neuroplastic period. And when you get exposed to it, it's gonna, with time, impact attention, learning, mood, all those things we just talked about. And so, especially for the adolescent brain, we want to keep them away from experimenting as a self-medication strategy with these things.
Great. And just before we move on to the sort of cannabis co-use, one of the questions that's coming in is, and we sort of touched on it, which is, what does nicotine withdrawal look like in a teen? And is it different from what it looks like in adults? And then we'll get to proven strategies to help them
It
later.
looks similar, except that they have less control and they're often hiding it. And so for an adult, when they're in nicotine withdrawal, hopefully you have other options. And oftentimes it's not hidden behavior and you can seek help. But for these kids, often this is a hidden secret behavior. That's part of what, addiction famously hides in the secrets. And part of why kids like to do behaviors is because their parents don't know about it and their parents disapprove of them. That's part of the rebellion. That's a normal adolescent process, is forging that. And so often they're handling the withdrawal in isolation. And as I said earlier, their brain's not fully developed. And so they're going to have less, it's going to feel heavier and more intense to them. They can't ride through the negative emotions as easily without their fully formed brain. And so that anxiety is going to feel a little bit more, that inability to sleep is going to feel a little more stressful. And then it's going to be hard to not use. It's brutal though. Kids stop it and they feel like they're going to die sometimes. I mean, I've had kids, refuse to go on family vacations because they know they can't get it and, refuse all sorts of stuff just because they're so fearful of that withdrawal state. And they really don't know where to turn because sometimes to ask for help is admitting a bunch of use that you're not ready to admit to as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. And we'll get to some quit strategies in a bit. So I want to just talk a little bit because we get a lot of questions again about marijuana use and also the dual use of marijuana and nicotine. So can you talk a little bit about the connection between marijuana and nicotine use, the co-use, and what the issues are with that? Because I know that some use one to come up and one to come down, and then they kind of collide. So, and that's been a popular strategy for some youth.
Yeah, they co-occur frequently. Often nicotine precedes marijuana, but if you're smoking weed, that does increase your odds of then using nicotine. They both act on the reward pathway. As I said, nicotine acts on dopamine via these nicotinic receptors, and then THC works on dopamine via the cannabinoid system. And the brain loves that. It loves that using them together because they really potentiate each other. And they're often delivered in the same mechanism through these vapes. And so it's often the same device, the same peer group, the same behavioral cues. And you're especially at risk of this co-occurrence if you have anxiety, ADHD, trauma, this family history of substance use. And it's clinically relevant because, weed use, in addition to the nicotine, really impacts mental health and it sort of potentiates the mental health concern of all of it and also makes a really wicked withdrawal state from the two of them as well. It's important to note that marijuana has been associated with this EVALI, this vaping use associated lung injury from this vitamin E acetate contaminants that are involved, but it too comes with other lung issues and other impacts on the brain and body. And marijuana, more than nicotine, it's associated as one of the biggest modifiable risk factors for the most serious mental health conditions too, like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And we're seeing increasingly at our hospital, for example, kids coming with really frank and disturbing paranoia states and other states from high dose marijuana products these days. And often they started with nicotine or have nicotine on board.
And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for my generation anyway, is that the cannabis today, the weed today, is so much stronger than it was in our generation. So kids are really exposed to such a high level that, and I think that's, part of why you're seeing all these, the psychosis and all of these mental health issues.
Yeah, I mean it's true of the nicotine and the THC that they're just so much higher. You get them so much quicker these days. And the adolescent brain is like, whoa. I mean, it's so quickly reinforcing and then it feels like it helps because it's really quite an intoxication state, and then it makes everything worse so quickly. And before you know it, you're just stuck on each of them, and you don't know a way out. It's also very hard to figure out how to quit them because people often try to do them stepwise and find that hard, or do them both together. You become it sort of really can trip up even clinicians on how to manage it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And then just briefly, just talking about the risks, which you have mentioned some of it. But I think interestingly, to your point earlier, that youth really perceive it. It's perceived benefits of, can help me sleep, kind of reduces my stress, which maybe in the short term it does. But if you can just talk a little bit about these risk factors.
And this is a societal change. I think we as a society, despite THC being much more potent in this marijuana product, we're sort of viewing it as a safer thing these days. It's everywhere. I've had tons of adults in my practice talk about marijuana at the end of the year party now, and marijuana being the acceptable thing because alcohol sort of is less acceptable among adults these days, or the harms are increasingly being talked about. And so more of my adults and the parents of the kids I see are using marijuana as a quote unquote healthy alternative. And so this perceived benefit is by youth, but also by their parents, increasingly as a good stress and anxiety relief, as sleep aid, a way to, replace alcohol, which of course has its own host of negative things. But yeah, it really does the adolescent brain no favors. Decreases motivation, decreases academic performance, associated with increased risk of not only anxiety, depression, but also, I mentioned earlier, it's one of the biggest modifiable risk factors for more serious mental health issues like schizophrenia, just because of the potency. And again, more potency comes with a more difficult withdrawal state. And so that withdrawal state is also really uncomfortable with anxiety, sleep disturbance, appetite suppression. You add that nicotine to that, and these kids feel like they can't even move out of their bed.
Yeah, and I think at least, I live in New York, but I think I'm hearing this countrywide, which is that the behavior has been more normalized because many states are legalizing marijuana. So for adults, however, it's widely available for pretty much anyone because I don't think that most shops are doing age verifications very well or effectively, if at all. And so it's very easy to get for our youth. It's available, on almost every street corner in many shops. And so I think it's normalized the behavior, but also made it very accessible. And I think to your point, having parents use it also really normalizes the behavior because if your own parents are using edibles or whatever, then why shouldn't they, right? But it is important. Let's just say that I am a parent of a youth and I use marijuana or weed or I vape at home. Can you talk about the conversation that you might want to have with your child to say, "Do as I say, not as I do"? How do you talk to your youth about that?
It's hard. I mean, the ideal thing is to start talking with them early and often about substances. Talk to them about your own experience, your own family experience with it, why you drink or don't drink or how much you drink. It's sort of like if you're not talking about it, you're missing something. Like marijuana is the smell of New York. Like if you're not talking about your kids what that smell is as you walk, in and out of your apartment in New York City, you're ignoring something that they're seeing and experiencing every day. And so the idea is to have frequent non-crisis, almost casual conversations with about them in an ongoing way about alcohol, nicotine, weed, about mental health issues. They recommend now starting to talk to kids with mental health issues at least by age 8 and addiction at least by age 9. And so you want to set the stage that this is something you're interested in, that these are the family values around it, and that, it's an ongoing conversation you want to have with them. And then as they get older, and the health classes are doing, I mean, my 12-year-old's getting it in health class. She had to present on nicotine actually about a month ago. So they have some of the vocabulary even through school. And so you can check in with that, see what their understanding is of it, see if their friends are using, start to check in casually, but just keep having those conversations, having those conversations, having those conversations. And so then when you're in crisis mode, it's not your first time talking with them because inevitably they're gonna have a really challenging mental health moment or they're gonna use substances and you want to be ready for that moment. You want to be able to take a breath, know that it's coming, and really try to understand the why of they used, what the context was, make sure they have the relevant information, and to try to go in with understanding and validation and not punishment and finger wagging when that time comes. And hopefully you've set that stage over time so that it's not the first time you guys have had that conversation. But it's hard. And sometimes these can take hold quickly. And sometimes it is, frankly, holding on for dear life, keeping them safe, keeping the bowling ball down the lane with the bumpers as best we can. But as long as we keep talking and keep showing the kids that we're interested and available to talk about it, I think that's a main key.
Yeah, and I remember one parenting expert I always resonates with me is is underreact. So if you're overreacting and you're expressing panic, they're just going to pull away and be more secretive about it. But to be open to the conversation and just, hey, interesting, tell me more, which is so hard to do when you're in a panic state of, oh my God, my kid's addicted and I don't know what to do, just to keep calm and keep the conversation open.
The urge is to say, I gave birth to you and I'm going to kill you. And the problem is that that immediately pushes the kids, they almost have to take the other side because you're coming down so strong on them. They have no choice but to sort of hide and withdraw. And so if we can lead with validation, even though it's really hard, and say, look, I can understand how you in that situation did X, Y, and Z, and then get them hopefully to explore it a little bit. Sometimes you can then get them to get some of the change talk and some of the, like, why aren't you punishing me? Or I know once you get the change talk to come from them, then you have an in terms of helping them modify and think about this behavior in a way that hopefully moves the chains.
Which brings us to our next topic, which is what everybody wants to know, which is the quit strategies.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess before we get too far into it, I wanted to share this visual, and I'm sharing it. I think it's a very common one in addiction, but I saw this when I was struggling to try to convince my young adult to quit. It was very frustrating as a parent. I didn't know what to do. I kept throwing strategies at her. I said, I'll do anything, try this, try that, try hypnosis, try, patches, whatever. But what I realized when I saw this, it was so clear to me. I looked at this and I said, okay, she's only at the pre-contemplation phase right now. There's nothing I can do but sit on my hands and wait. And so I had a conversation with her and just said, look, we love you. We are here to support you, but I don't know that you're ready to quit. But when you are, we are ready to throw any resources at it that you want. And so I had to wait until she got to this planning and action phase. And that was the most frustrating and hard to do thing as a parent. But this really allowed me to understand where she was on this circle. So if you can just talk a little bit about quitting strategies, and
Yeah,
yes,
and kids cycle through this cycle on like a day-to-day basis sometimes, Sometimes it's F you in the morning and I'm ready to change by the afternoon. So it goes fast in kids. The idea being that when they're really not interested in change talk, we can't throw it at them when they're sort of pre-contemplative or not ready to sort of think about it. But as soon as they're starting to say, oof, I really want to change this, then you want to be there ready with those resources. And maybe you described great the sort of ideal parent approach is sort of be ready when you want the resources to meet the motivation. And luckily for nicotine, there are good motivation. There are good treatments, rather. First, I would say some of the initial treatments may not even be addressing the nicotine. They may be addressing the mental health issue, helping them. Maybe it's a peer group issue. Maybe it's a stress at school issue. Sometimes even if nicotine's the loudest thing that's screaming at you, or marijuana is the loudest thing screaming at you, it may be the last thing to address, probably because it's the last thing they want to address, but also sometimes resolving some of those other things, the undiagnosed ADHD, the undiagnosed learning issue, the really bad teacher, or the bullying at school, or whatever it may be. Sometimes that then fixes the nicotine. And, kids' brains are developing. And so kids sometimes can sort of like quit and move on really fast. And so sometimes just helping them with their environment and their mental health is the thing that precipitates change. But for nicotine, especially because of the potency and the withdrawal states, especially if they've been using it for months to a year, it does help to have some of these evidence-based treatments that we've studied in adults and extrapolated to kids that pediatricians are often feel equipped these days to handle. And the national pediatric organizations have encouraged pediatricians to address it, and they're probably your first place to go. And what they could do is help the kids with a nicotine taper plan, often giving patches plus the gum. And then there's also medications, two in particular. One's an antidepressant that helps people quit, and the other is a med that targets the nicotine receptor called varenicline or Chantix. And sometimes adding a medication when you're really stuck can help people exit the nicotine. But there's on average, when you're really stuck, it takes, 5 or 6 quit attempts. And so often you're starting, people try to start quitting cold turkey or addressing the mental health. And you say, oh, that's really hard. Let's try the patch and the gum. Well, that's not enough. Let's add a medication to help get you there. Um, and these treatments are very effective when given.
And how young can youth start taking some of these more prescription like NRTs and Chantrix and all of that?
Like a lot of the mental health treatments aren't sort of geared towards adolescents, but we use them for it, and it's similar with this. And so, for nicotine replacement, which is sort of the more, it's not a medication like the antidepressant or varenicline, the nicotine agonist. Sometimes people will start younger because often what the kid wants to try to do is to taper themselves off the Zins or off the vape. But that's really hard to do. And often the nicotine gum or the patch, it provides a different way of intaking the nicotine to slowly decrease it. That's less reinforcing because it doesn't have that flavor. It doesn't have the culture around its use, and you're often doling it out and helping them get there. And so that can really help. So I've used that on very young folks as young as 12 in my practice who have been really stuck. But you're careful as the younger they are. And then you're more careful with medications because they've been mainly studied in adults. But for kids who are stuck, we've used it on kids, 15, 16, 17, who need that sort of extra boost to get off it. If they have mental health issues, the antidepressant that's used is called Wellbutrin or bupropion. And often you can use that to help target the depression and the nicotine use. And it has some soft stimulant effects, so it helps with attention as well. And so sometimes that can be helpful. And sometimes pediatricians and adolescent psychiatrists are more comfortable with that medication.
Oh, interesting. And we have talked a little bit about this, but it is really hard to watch as a parent for a child to try to quit and then they go back to vaping, nicotine, or whatever nicotine use, whatever device they're using. We know it can take several tries to quit. So can you talk about, how we can talk to them and help them with their frustration and, be compassionate?
Relapses are going to happen. And we've talked about how powerful this is on the brain. They sing it all around them. It's inevitable. And so you want to cheerlead them as they're doing it, but be prepared, especially so you don't overreact when it does happen. And it's always a little bit of a dance how to telegraph to kids that relapses are common because you want to cheerlead them on, but you want to give them some permission so they can not feel ashamed and come to you if they do use. And so it's both you got this, but look, if there's any slips, let me know. We'll brainstorm. We'll think about how to handle this. And as I mentioned before, it takes multiple quit attempts to get there. And so you've got to just prepare yourself that it's gonna happen and it's gonna take multiple effort. And then if you don't react, like the non-reactivity is so key. Like if you can not react when you catch them, it really then sets the stage for being able to re-put a plan into motion to help them.
And you mentioned shame, and I know that that's an area that you've studied a lot. Can you talk about the link between shame and the opposite of that, whatever the opposite would be, but in terms of just being open and I would say compassionate, as opposed to shaming, because that could pull them back farther into the shadows and being private about it.
Yeah, we've got to be careful when we talk about it, not to talk about it as bad behavior or try to punish our way out of it. We have a long history trying to punish people out of addiction, and unfortunately, it doesn't work. So my research is on the stigma of addiction that shows substance use is the most stigmatized condition in society. Our attitudes are worse towards those who use nicotine, weed, opiates than towards any other medical or psychiatric condition. And I even studied adolescent providers, like adolescent medicine folks, and even their attitudes aren't so great. There's still this viewpoint in all these spaces that should be the safest. They get it at school from friends that this is bad behavior. It's a moral failing. And what happens when that's the predominant narrative is that you start to think that you're a failing. Like everyone I see comes in and they expect me to shame them for doing it. And very quickly they feel relieved when that doesn't happen because they're telling themselves, I suck. What's wrong with me? Why am I using? They can seem defiant, but it's hiding a real vulnerability and a real shame often that comes around the use of this. And so if we double down on that shame, we can really push them away and worsen some of the mental health stress. And so um yet we're worried and we're scared and we're trying to propel them forward. So it is a delicate dance, but understand that even the most defiant kid feels very vulnerable underneath that.
And I think parents also feel a sense of stigma as well, and maybe less willing to get help either for their child or for themselves, right? Because you know, it's a reaction to your own child, and maybe you feel ashamed too that you haven't done a better job, or, I think that's, we say no shame, no blame on the kids in that they were targeted. They were targeted to believe these products were not harmful to them, targeted to believe that they were cool and they were innocuous. And I think as parents, we feel, that we are somehow responsible. But really, I think, we have to put most of the blame on the tobacco industry and the vaping industries for, really targeting our kids. Now that we know about it, I think we can do a better job of having conversations. But really, it starts, with being open-minded and not shaming our kids, which is also very hard to do. And I know we did have a question come in about punishment, like why isn't it not okay to take privileges away or that kind of thing? And can you talk a little bit about that, because that is a very common reaction for parents.
First, I'll just say that was a great point around parents feeling the shame, and it's not your fault. We're all doing the best we can. Parenting is so hard. I'm an addiction psychiatrist. My wife's a child psychiatrist. My kids are going to rebel. There's no doubt. There's no prevent. We're doing the best we can, but life is hard, and we're all tackling this together. And so don't let the shame prevent you from getting help and reaching for resources and care for yourself. The ideally you're leading with a carrot and not the stick in terms of the punishment. Ideally you're catching them and you're trying to structure the system in a way where you're trying to reward good behavior and trying to ideally not reward negative behavior. And so while you're trying to minimize the punishment, sometimes you have to when behavior gets dangerous, and sometimes there are family rules and expectations, and that can be fine to set some limits and some parameters. But again, it gets into this bad behavior dance that sometimes there's no way out of it unless we're really sort of addressing it as a health issue and figuring out a way through with more treatment than not. Um, and so, the worry is with punishment, it pushes it to the secrets, especially with these devices that, allow for such secrecy. They end up worsening the relationship. That being said, what parents often do is they don't let natural consequences occur, which I think is incredibly important. They use substances and they miss basketball practice, and we tell the coach they were sick, or they get in a fight with their friend because they were too intoxicated at the party, and we're like giving them all these sorts of, we're sort of, in some ways, I hate the term enabling, but we're sort of like we're covering up for some of the natural consequences of their use. I find we do that often more than we punish, especially this generation of parents. We don't want to, we want them to feel the natural consequences. Those are the things that are actually going to help them change in addition to addressing the mental health stuff.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah. Thank you. So we talk a little bit about some of the resources, and you've mentioned some of them. There are other ones, there are digital quitting programs. There are apps that youth can use, and there are some even for parents to use to help support quitting. I think combination of things tends to maybe work better than just one or the other. But and we have talked a little bit about some of these that, again, relapse is normal. And that I think one of the things you mentioned earlier is really important, which is that they may not say it, but most kids want to quit. They may not talk about it, but they really do want to quit, and they just don't know how. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. I remember you
Yeah.
telling me once, or maybe it was telling one of the youth, you have to tell everyone. Like maybe there are some strategies you can share. Tell everyone you're trying to quit. I mean, changing your situation so that you're not in that place where you're always vaping. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of those strategies for youth.
Yeah, if the kid is motivated, it can become a good challenge and one that you can align on and ideally while the substances grew in secrets, the way out is to in theory, tell your friends. I even give kids like strategies like say that sometimes kids who feel like the peer pressure too much, I tell them just tell them your parent's a real problematic parent who's going to urine test you for drugs and let the parent be the bad guy for the kid as a way to say no. And so, I think it can get fun. And then you think about how to manage the after school stuff and how to manage peer groups and therapists is great for that. Parents are great for that. Once they're motivated to quit, it can become a really rewarding process for you and your teen or the teen and their clinician. And so definitely telling everyone. But yeah, the part of the kid that always wants to quit. Part of them finds it really hard. A part of the kid is also aligned with you, parent, and likes you and loves you. And a part of them is trying to differentiate themselves and wants to be the exact opposite. And so they're also going through that dance at the same time they're doing that dance. Should I not quit or be honest or not? And so even if and these withdrawal states can bring out that negative side a lot, but I promise you, even if that's all you're seeing for a number of years, there's a part of them that really wants that love, wants that validation. And most kids, even without intervention, believe it or not, age out of the problematic substance use as they make their way into their 20s and then they're always like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I was so rough to my parents." I think
For
some of
me,
us
I
in
mean,
this room, maybe even myself, have said that to the parents after we've made our way through it. So but it's hanging on for dear life at times.
yeah, thank you. And you did touch upon this, but experts like you have told us that there is a higher incidence of nicotine use and substance use among youth with mental health challenges like anxiety and depression. And so, for parents who have youth like this, I'm wondering if they approach the situation differently, or are there different strategies, or is it pretty much the same? And I think you did address this a bit, but if you want to touch on it a little bit more.
But in terms of prevention, the numbers are really high. Like 90% of people that use nicotine and weed and problematic alcohol use, they had a mental health issue before the substance use issue emerged, and co-occurring conditions is more the rule than the exception. And so, the risk factors for getting stuck on nicotine and weed are having a mental health issue, having trauma, having a family history of addiction, especially in your parents or your grandparents or those first degree relatives. And so you want to tell them, like I work with a parent who often helps me around the stigma of addiction, tells the story of how her daughter progressed to more serious substance use. And she always says she wished that her child psychiatrist or therapist had told her when the child had an eating disorder that that was a risk factor for future substance use. And she wishes that someone had told her daughter that because you have this mental health condition, you're more likely to get stuck on substances when you use them, and it might be harder to get off them. And so that's why you should be careful. And two, if you find yourself using, try to intervene quicker. And I will say, when you have mental health issues, you might you might quicker go to trying to quit with medications and nicotine replacement rather than trying to sort of quit cold turkey and do some of the other things, just because it might be much harder to tolerate the withdrawal state, much harder to tolerate the anxiety and depression that comes with trying to quit.
And if people don't have real direct resources to therapists, to direct one-on-one for cognitive behavioral therapy or other things that you might recommend, are there other strategies that they can use, that are more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, the school often has guidance counselors that are pretty equipped to tackle, some of the social support. I would talk to the pediatrician that everyone's got a pediatrician about some of the meds. And then other things they're harder to get the kids into, but getting them into sports and even mindfulness meditation stuff and using some of the online digital apps and therapies can be effective. I had someone who used one of these mental health apps and found them helpful in quitting. There's a number that you can just look up. I like that there's some good ones around marijuana, like the 30-day marijuana break apps that are out there and can help guide the kids through the withdrawal states and are free or very inexpensive. So I would throw everything at it. You want to give
Yeah.
your kids a menu, see what resonates, and take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of withdrawal, can you just mention, I know we've talked a bit about nicotine withdrawal, but can you mention what the withdrawal symptoms are for cannabis so that parents are aware and do they differ?
There's a lot of overlap. They can be almost identical at times in that, except with, so you have the sleep disturbance, you have the anxiety, the mood symptoms, you feel like blah, you feel like you've been punched in the stomach, basically. Um, for nicotine, when you stop nicotine, you get more hungry. For weed, I think I might have said the opposite accidentally earlier. And for when you stop marijuana use, you often don't have an appetite. The other thing that to notice in kids with marijuana, especially these high dose ones, is we're noticing it has really does have tremendous impact on the GI system, and we're seeing increasingly kids with like cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where they're sort of vomiting all the time and feeling very nauseous. And our GI doctors are for adolescent when your kid's got sort of an upset stomach all the time, our GI doctor is saying like 75% of times it's marijuana use, even less than daily. So some of that stuff can get exacerbated in withdrawal state, but often it does get better with time and cessation.
And because I'm curious, for parents who are trying to support their kids in quitting or are just really frustrated, what do you think about the idea of testing, like urine testing, which you can do easily at home? I don't know about cannabis testing, if that shows up in urine or does that feel too, like you're trying to catch your child?
And not everyone agrees with me. Um, I am a fan of testing for nicotine and marijuana. Marijuana stays in the system for a long time, so if they're using chronically, it's not as great. You really have to send them to a lab to get
Mm,
the levels to understand if they're dipping with time. But I like urine screens as positive motivation. Like I have so many kids, I set up this treatment where if they're testing negative for nicotine and weed on Thursday, they get to go out with their friends or
mm,
they have later curfew. It's part of the way to set up the carrot more than the stick.
mhm.
The parents get frustrated though because you start testing them and it's coming up positive at first for weeks and weeks and weeks, and so the kid's not getting the rewards. And so that's how we would set it up more than punishment. Like you would set it up and say, look, right now your curfew's this. We'll give you more money, more curfew, more time with your girlfriend if you get this to negative, or I see that the level is dropping with time. I think that's a better way to do it than punishing. The when people try to do it as like if they test positive, you're grounded for the rest of the week, that ends up then they're never not grounded, it ends up being more negative.
Stuck. Okay. Yeah, I mean they're very easy, very accessible. You can get them on Amazon or wherever. So I
Yeah,
just
they're
didn't
not that expensive.
know. All right. Well, I am trying to see if there's any other quick questions. I know we're almost out of time. I feel like we've gotten to a lot of these questions. I know there was one about, which is pretty extreme, but about kids um, who have been treated for opioid addictions and other more severe addictions that, it's sort of they're using the nicotine as like at least my kid's not using opioids. I mean, obviously it seems less extreme, but, how do you have that conversation? Because you don't want kids using nicotine. I mean, nicotine is a gateway, but how about the other way?
Yeah, it sometimes is the last thing in a stepwise pattern that we address. And you'll notice if your kids ever need rehab or they go to 12-step meetings, there are a lot of people using nicotine and caffeine at those meetings. And sometimes that's better than using opiates. Sometimes they just can't tackle it in the moment. And opiates are
Mhm.
carry a high risk of overdose and death, which nicotine doesn't carry. So sometimes we, in a stepwise way, address the opiates, but I am always keeping an eye on it because I think sometimes we just forget about it. And as we've mentioned today, it carries significant risk in and of itself. And so as they get stable in their recovery from opiates, I'm always trying to readdress the nicotine and get them off it and get them to a healthier spot. And plus, once you get off substances and you've struggled, there's such a freedom and clarity that comes with it. Like the other side of addiction, which many of your kids, it doesn't feel like they'll get there, but the odds are for anyone struggling, they'll be in recovery one day. And for having gone through that, you often develop a wisdom and a strength, and you reconnect with your parents and the people in your life, and it can feel good on the other side. And sometimes people are better off for these hard moments. And so there's always hope, and I hope people keep hope even if some of this content scared them today.
Yeah, it is scary to be a parent, like you said, and but we do get through it. We're here to support you. This is another QR code we're sharing with you. If you want to connect with us, we want people across the country to volunteer, to share their stories, or to help educate others in their community. So if you are interested, please scan this as well. You will be getting an email follow up with the link to the recording to this. And you will be getting, I believe, a survey. So we'd love to hear. It's just a couple questions, feedback. We'd love to hear from you to see what we could do more of or better. So, and I also want to thank you. This is the same QR code you saw at the beginning. I do want to thank our sponsor, the Arizonans Concerned About Smoking. They've been terrific sponsors of ours and supporters, so I want to give them a shout out. And I especially want to thank you, Dr. Avery. As always, you always learn something from you, and I'm sure people found this useful. You're a terrific advocate, and just I love what you do with your youth, and we're really grateful for all the information that you've shared tonight. If anyone has any questions or wants to follow up, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, thank you. Stay safe and have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, Mimi. Thanks, everybody.
So much, Doctor.